Yeah, I see that as the discussion gets more animated, it's getting harder to herd the cats. We're going to turn now to our last session, which is really about the future of science and scientific societies and science administration. And we have now a couple of talks. And it's my pleasure to first introduce Fleming Crim, who's an emeritus professor of chemistry from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And he is also a person who is deeply familiar with the workings of NSF from having spent a good fraction of his career there. So thank you, Fleming.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to have heard all that I've heard about oceanography today, which is, it's really been a delight. So Margaret, thank you for the excuse. I am an emeritus professor at Wisconsin. I want to emphasize that I am the former chief operating officer and the former assistant director for math and physical sciences at NSF. And you'll understand as we go on about why I'm saying that. I'm also an external science advisor to the Science Philanthropy Alliance, and the reason I mention that will become obvious soon. We're here because of the multidimensional Margaret Leinen, okay? And here are a few of the axes I've labeled, and having listened at lunch and having listened to the early presentations, I'm limited to 3 dimensions even in this 2-dimensional representation, but it's really a lot more. But it's the leadership policy part that I want to talk about. When I went to NSF as the assistant director for MPS, there was talk of this legendary AD who had led geosciences. So I first, before I met Margaret, kept hearing about her as a director, an assistant director, a leader of a directorate, which I should aspire to be as good as, okay? And then when I was chief operating officer, we needed to search for a new geoscience AD, and Margaret led that effort for us, and it was really a pleasure working with her, and that's when we first got to know each other, primarily over the telephone and Zoom. And then Margaret and I have become colleagues again at the Science Philanthropy Alliance. The Science Philanthropy Alliance, I'm going to say a little bit more about this later, but it's basically an alliance of a collection of philanthropists driven by Bob Kahn, Kavli, and some people earlier. But it works to bring philanthropists together to support basic research. And Margaret is one of the other external science advisors, and I have many times been in meetings where I heard Margaret express forceful and insightful opinions about what should happen in some cases, and they were always good. Well, I want to talk about a view of the scientific landscape, and I put the changing in many dimensions up there to sort of cover myself, but Rick Murray earlier today used a term that means one thing to you and I think means something else in this context. That's environmental forcing. I think the environment for doing science and the research landscape is being forced by external forces that all of us think about and all of us know about. And although the things I want to say really are about the landscape in general, you cannot talk about these things but having the events of the last 100 days sort of washing through everything. So as I make my comments, you might think about how is that comment modified by the current climate. No pun intended. This is a statement that I think most of us would agree with. It says basic research provides scientific capital. Today, it is truer than ever that basic research is the pacemaker of technological progress, and this goes on to say that if we are not creating that basic knowledge, we are going to be behind as a country. This is from something we've heard about already, Science, the Endless Frontier, written 80 years ago. And it led, 5 years after its publication and a lot of politics, to the foundation of the National Science Foundation. And you've seen Vannevar Bush once today. And in fact, any discussion about the landscape of science and the trajectory of science often involves his name. Well, how many things that are in the endless frontier are timeless principles which hold today, and how many of them need to be modified 80 years later? A lot of people are thinking about that, and Rick Spinrad this morning told us about that notion, about that kind of a study. In fact, many of the things I'm going to say will echo some things that you said this morning. So recently, a group of people were talking about a topic that has been asserted several times, the Endless Frontier 2.0. What should it look like? Well, in October of last year, a group of people, about 70 folks altogether, got together to present a vision for American science and technology. Goes by the acronym FAST. In fact, Research for America and the AAAS provided a lot of the technical support, administrative support to do this. It was funded by the Simons Foundation, Moore Foundation, Reed Allen Foundation, and the Paul G. Allen's Frontier Group. And there are three main points. I encourage you to read this. It's only 14 pages long, and it's very clearly written. One was that we were at a crossroads. Now remember, they began this in October of 2024. I think they didn't understand quite how dramatic the crossroads we were going to be at today were. Their vision was an all-of-America science and technology enterprise. And they talked about 3 avenues for action. So I don't want to talk about these in too much detail, but I want to just show you what those avenues for action were. One relates to the research enterprise, the other relates to the workforce, and the third to what we do in basic and applied research and how we decide what to do. The punchline about the research enterprise is to reduce inefficiencies and break down barriers. I believe today the talk we're hearing about making us more efficient is in fact something that we can all get behind. It's the mechanism that I think is causing a lot of heartburn right now. Workforce. Build the strongest and most adaptable workforce in human history. I think that that's almost a self-evident statement of what we need to do. It's also the case that I think a lot of the turmoil going on right now, particularly about our collaboration with foreign scientists and bringing foreign students in and how they feel in this country is making that harder, but it's the right goal. And finally, the discussion of basic and applied research has implicit in this document how you choose between the two and how much sort of policy do you have determining directions, how much do you have curiosity-driven research causing this. But it says that we need to drive breakthroughs, again, a self-evident statement, I believe, compete globally, address societal challenges, and strengthen national security. Again, I think the last 3 of those are topics where we're feeling a lot of turmoil today. Well, something that Margaret and I have thought about in the context of the Science Philanthropy Alliance is who is funding that basic research that's so extolled in some of these documents. These are data from the National Center for Science and Education Statistics, and they're up to 2023. The federal government funds 51% of basic research. Non-federal government, state and local government, fund another 4%. Business funds 7%, and a form of philanthropy or nonprofit activity funds 23% and 8%. The 23% is institutional higher education. This is money from endowments. And so this is indirect. Much of that has come from philanthropy, but it is not direct philanthropy. Finally, the direct philanthropy part that funds higher education, funds research directly through higher education, is about 7%. Okay, and there are numbers there where you can see the magnitudes of these. It is that direct philanthropy portion that the Science Philanthropy Alliance has been most engaged with and most concerned about. And I want you to remember a number of about $6 billion. Okay, that's what that contribution is. That'll come back in a moment. So, how has that changed over the years? Let's look at data from 1953 to 2023, 70 years of data. And we're going to look at the fraction funded by each of these segments versus time. The federal government's contribution in the 60s, as you would have guessed, went through a maximum of about 75%, and today is 51%, which is up just a little bit from a few years ago. The philanthropic part, broadly defined, the way I defined it, including endowments, accounts for about 38% of that. And then business and non-federal government, that accounts for another, 11% or something of it. So there's about $30 billion, including the money from endowments and all the other forces. So let me show you one example of how that federal government number comes into existence. I'm going to show you data for NSF, but I think this is a theme about how the sausage gets made that is true for all the agencies. This is the enacted budget for the National Science Foundation over 11 years, fiscal year 13 to 23, and there's about a 43% increase over those years. How did that enacted number come into existence? Well, it starts with the president's budget request. Here is the request, the president's budget request over those same years. You can identify the administration by looking at the magnitude of the request. And here's how that compares to what I just showed you, the enacted budget. When the president asks for a lot of money, or relatively more money for science, Congress tends not to provide all of it. When the president doesn't ask for much money for science, Congress tends to raise it up, and that's how you get that relatively monotonic gradual increase over those years. You can see the requests for 2024. If you cast your mind back, you'll remember that there was both a government shutdown and a debt ceiling negotiation at that time that was very complicated. And that ended up, despite that very large request, of Congress producing about a $9 billion budget for NSF. This is a story that's true for all the agencies to a good approximation. Of course, that same negotiation that produced that number in 2024 led to a smaller presidential request for 2025. But of course, we're sitting on a continuing resolution right now. The question is, will this historical pattern of the tension between the president's request and Congress's allocation, will that survive? You know, I don't know if that history is a good predictor of what will happen next, but there is a historical record that Congress does react to the president's budget with a different sign depending on the magnitude of the request. Now, let's think for a minute about these numbers. We've all heard of the skinny budget that has the president's request for NSF in it. The $4.3 billion request for NSF does not fit on this plot. The lowest level is $6.5 billion. I'll have to redo the plot, okay? It's two major divisions down below that, below the baseline there. And you know, That's just not NSF that's having that happen. In fact, let me show you some data for the federal government. These are the proposed changes in that skinny budget, ranging from a 84% decrease for state down to a plus 65% for Homeland Security. Let me pull out some of the science agencies there: NSF, NIH, NOAA, and NASA. Now, of course, NIH is part of Health and Human Services. Notice that NIH has a 38% decrease, while Health and Human Services has a 25% decrease. That pattern of the science component of the agency being reduced more than the overall agency is true in almost all agencies. Commerce is the home for NOAA and the home for NIST. You can look at the magnitudes there. The DOE Office of Science, USGS, and only the science part of EPA takes a smaller cut than all of EPA. Everybody else has a bigger proposed cut. Here are some numbers for the agencies that have the biggest budgets. If you add those up, they're about $30 billion. Remember that number for direct philanthropy, about $6 billion? There is no way that philanthropy is going to step up and make up these deficits. So what's the conversation among philanthropists? Again, Margaret and I were at a meeting last week where this conversation was going on, and that is, where do they deploy their funding? Even if they're increasing their funding, it's modest compared to these cuts. Where do they deploy their funding to help the enterprise the best and do the most good? A lot of the discussion is we have to take care of young people, okay? And folks are worried about losing an entire generation. So, I love this quote from Victor Hugo. He said, "Science says the first word on everything and the last word on nothing." The facts we love and the proposals we generate interact with the political scene and the policy scene. It's important for us to remember that. Another theme that I'm hearing a lot is that you need to be speaking to the people who you know, be they your neighbors, your colleagues. Your colleagues are pretty convinced, but your neighbors, your colleagues, your local representative, your state representative, your national representative. But you've got to talk to them about the things they care about. When we go out as scientists and talk about science has changed the world and is going to change the world, that may have less impact than if we talk about some piece of science that has made a difference in that person's life. I recently was in a meeting with Francis Collins, and I told him I've always been jealous that he had biomedical and diseases to talk about. Oceanography or chemistry or physics doesn't have the disease to talk about. Although I heard some pretty persuasive things today about the consequences of oceanography, I have to admit. But you are not talking to an extraordinarily negative audience despite what we think. This is a question, the question that Research for America put to U.S. adults, some U.S. adults, a sampling of U.S. adults earlier this year, was asking them to respond to this statement. Even if it brings no immediate benefits, basic scientific research that advances the frontiers of knowledge is necessary and should be supported by the federal government. 44% of the respondents strongly agreed with that, and 41% somewhat agreed. 7% and 2% somewhat disagreed or strongly disagreed, and 6% were not sure. At this very low resolution level, we are not talking to people who are anti-science. We're talking to people who haven't seen the connection. Well, I want to close by making a few comments about the landscape in the future. Yogi Berra said it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. It actually turns out that Niels Bohr, Casey Stengel, Mark Twain, Groucho Marx, and Freeman Dyson are also supposed to have said that, so I'm glad to see a couple of scientists on that list. So what does the research landscape look like? This is a slide that I've shown a number of times, and today my reaction to it is different than it was 3 or 4 months ago. We have abundant little intellectual opportunity. No one here would disagree with that, and the science we have heard about during this meeting illustrates that. There's tremendous competition for resources. I originally have always thought of this as competition among the different disciplines for resources. I think there's a very different competition going on now, and a very difficult one. We are part of the global community. Are we going to make that work or not? There are changing demographics and workforce challenges, and those two things are strongly related. If we're going to have the workforce of the future, as mentioned in the VAST report, we are going to have to speak to all of our citizens and bring them into science. And finally, the universities are changing. Again, they were changing, and now the slope has increased dramatically. Okay, so they're changing fantastically. Well, there's a lot to think about this. There's some good news and some bad news. But Margaret, I want to congratulate you, and I want to thank you for giving us a chance to get together and talk about these things. Thank you.
Time for questions? Quick one?
One real quick one. I'll give a quick answer if you want. Okay, yes.
Does the research conducted by the Office of Naval Research come under military, or does it come under some other category in your?
It comes from the DoD budget, okay? And it turns out if you look at things like AFOSR, ONR, all those, the research portion of those agencies, at least in the proposal, has been getting hit pretty hard. But that's in DoD, but just as I separated out NIH from Health and Human Services, you can pull that piece out of DoD.
So that might be staying level or even going up?
I think not.
Thank you, Fleming. Okay, so we are going to move on, and we are, oh, that's not what we're going to move on to. You got it, okay. So our next speaker is going to be Chris McEntee. Many of you know her as the CEO, or the former CEO, I should say, since the present CEO is in the room, of the American Geophysical Union. And she's somebody who has had a lot of experience, more than a quarter of a century, as an association leader and innovator. I'm not going to read all that. But she comes from a position of expertise in how to run professional societies. That's what I should say.
Thank you. And thank you for being part of the search community that gave me the opportunity to work at AGO. I am honored to be here, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today at this symposium in honor of Margaret Leinen. I have worked in national and international nonprofit organizations, very large ones, for about 40 years. 20 of those, I was able to be, had the honor of being able to be the leader of those and partner with chairs of the board or presidents, depending on the particular organization. Stellar people who were all luminaries in their particular field and discipline, but I have to always say Margaret was the best, and I mean that sincerely. So when we think about science societies, well, why do they exist? Why did they come into being? So I thought, I'll create a word cloud of their current mission and vision statements. And so I took about 20, and this is what you get, what you would expect. Science and research are prominent. the recognition that science is a global enterprise, but interestingly enough, societal came out very strongly as well, so that we're advancing science through our societies for the benefit of society. Now, switching to dynamics external to the science societies and external to science itself, I picked 4, there's many of them, to kind of talk a little bit about today and what this might mean for the future of scientific societies. Threats, opportunities, and challenges ahead. Trust, artificial intelligence and machine learning, the global research, and the science policy landscape. Turning to global research. So you just heard a little bit about who invests most in basic research. But if you look across global research and development, overall, the US, there's a reason why we've been the envy of the world. We invest a lot. China is catching up to us through concerted efforts over the past several decades to really build up their scientific enterprise. And a lot of the other major economies have stayed pretty much the same in terms of their total investment. In the United States, apart from basic research, if you look at research and development overall, business provides a large portion of that. But where do they get their basic research from? They get it from all of you in the room and everything else that Fleming just talked about. And even though the federal government and higher education look relatively the same in terms of their investments, the federal government actually provides about 52% of what's done in the academic sector, in addition to the 48% they do of the science on their own. So the academic sector is really putting out a lot more of the basic research than the federal government scientific agencies are doing in their research work. The US is also a very large producer of people who get their PhDs in science. And until recently, they still were producing the largest number. Maybe not enough, but they were producing the largest number. But China has caught up, and we can imagine, given the current landscape, how that's going to continue to accelerate unless we can figure out how to at least mitigate the damage and then resurrect from it. What's interesting, though, is that people want to learn here. So a large proportion of individuals getting their PhDs in science and engineering in the United States are actually here on temporary visas. And they stay. So they're not just getting educated here, at least up until now, they actually want to stay here and work. So they're not only coming here to study, they become our future workforce to carry out all types of science and research. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So right now, we're at risk of losing all of it because of what's going on in the last, it's hard for me to believe it's 100 days. Feels like it's been 4 years already, because it's like just an onslaught every day. I had trouble preparing this talk because I kept finding new things I wanted to add into it for all of you. But anyway, we don't need to repeat all this because you're living this every day, but we're in the midst of a big reversal of the US commitment and investment. And this is going to lead, and it's already starting to lead, to a US brain drain. Nature asked people in the United States research community, do you want to consider leaving? 3/4 said yes. And at the end of last year, for the jobs that Nature puts up, some from outside the United States and some from inside the United States, we've seen a switch. There's more people applying for the jobs from the US to leave the US, and there's more people from the world also applying for jobs to stay outside the United States. Europe has noticed. Europe feels like perhaps they've underinvested in science. Since January, if you look across at least what I can find, from the European Union, the French government, the German government, some of the Scandinavian governments, plus some individual universities in Europe, it's already close to $1 billion they're committing to create postdoc positions, other research positions across all the sciences, and they're getting tons of applications. One university in the south of France put up enough money to fund about 20 positions. They had 200 and some applicants within a few couple weeks. So we're in the process of a major brain drain in the United States if we don't figure out how to do as much as we can to mitigate the damage that's going to be there, and then how we're going to grow once we can mitigate that damage. Now, in the midst of all this, artificial intelligence and machine learning is on the horizon. And, you know, there's a lot of promise, there's a lot of hype, but the fact is it's here, and it's bringing new capabilities or new possibilities for everything across scientific discovery to how we educate both the next generation of scientists, but also people currently in science who need a lot of upskilling and professional development. Most of the courses out there are very introductory, and they're not really deep enough or different enough to help people keep up with the pace of change. And it's changing the way we all work. And I mean, I can almost bet that most people in this room, and I will say I did, have used some kind of artificial intelligence means to help collect some of your background information for what you might talk about, either at a meeting or to conduct your research or whatever. Some use it more, some use it less. Wiley did some studies to look at what are researchers using artificial intelligence for today, and these were the top 5 uses. So you can see that there's still not great adoptions, but the highest uses are in the things where there's the least amount, in my view, of risk to be able to use it, and some beginning usage on some other areas, such as generating some scientific hypothesis, reviewing large amounts of information, but it's still about 25% for some of those other uses. But Wiley also asked people, how important do you think this is going to be to your work? And conversely, how familiar are you with it? And this is what they found. This is from just like in the last 6 months. Over the next 2 years, researchers, and this was like 6,000 researchers answered this question, think it's going to be quite important for their work. And by the time we get 5-10 years out, it gets up to almost the majority of researchers. However, large proportions of them are unfamiliar with the training they need, best practices, and how it can specifically apply to their particular research interest. 63% say they lack clear guidance, and an overwhelming majority feel like they're missing, that they have some grave concerns about artificial intelligence in terms of the ethics. Is it transparent? Is it accurate? And is it secure and private? So there's a lot of churn in advances in artificial and machine learning. At the same time, we're having a lot of disruption of the US scientific enterprise. Now let's look at trust in science and science policy. Contrary to what you might read in the paper, trust in science is high. This study was just published in this year, 2025, and they looked at a trust index where one was low trust and one was high trust. The weighted mean across all the countries was about 3.6, 3.7. There wasn't one of those 68 countries that was below 3. The US was at 5. The same survey that I think Fleming, you cited, which was done by Research America, by Edelman, they asked about trust in different types of people to do the right thing. Guess what? Scientists came out on top, and academics and experts were not far behind. That should be comfort to us. There's a lot of trust in us. Now, how great we are in communicating to be able to help people understand how they could help us in this current time is a wholly different story. And if you look at data in that, you will see that the majority of the public says scientists are terrible at communicating. But there's ways to really bring that up. I think what's also interesting in here is that trust is pretty high in CEOs of the organization I work for, but not high in CEOs overall. But that still means there's lots of opportunity, and friends and neighbors are also very important. So it leads to how can we better communicate or get messengers other than us to help amplify the voice of the value of science. Also interesting in the study that was published in 2025 is, what do you think about scientists' role in policymaking? It's actually fairly high in terms of agreement. And there's a lot of room in the middle, which I would call the persuadables, that scientists have an important role in policymaker. The one that really struck me, because it seems kind of counterintuitive to the science culture, is that there's even a fair amount of support for scientists to actually advocate for specific policies. Not just share what they know, but actually say, here's what we think some solutions can be. So let's look at science societies, and at least in my last 2 decades of working in large organizations, how they reacted right after President Trump's first term and what they've been doing year to date. Now, it's still early year to date, but I would argue that the threat is much higher and that action is needed much more quickly. And in the blue are the things that, at least from somebody now not in the inside every day, but what I'm trying to pay attention to. The blue is what the science societies have been doing universally across both of them. The science societies, some of them have picked up into the legal and the court system, which I think is a great addition to the toolbox. In terms, though, of mobilizing and getting the word out outside of the scientific enterprise, it hasn't been as visible. Now, you probably all remember the Great March for Science. It had 250 partner organizations. But we didn't see the science societies involved heavily, except for a few medical societies, in the Stand Up for Science rallies in March, or in staying connected to that movement the way might provide. I'm going to talk about them for a little bit. And there was a spin-up of new organizations after the first term. Margaret, I know you were involved in some of these. Science Counts, Campaign for Science, but they weren't sustained. 2017, 2018 came, Congress changed, then Biden won. There was a resurgence of investment, so these organizations didn't continue the support that they had received initially. But there is organizing happening. It's just happening among your younger generation. So in February, 3 graduate students, I think it was 2 graduate students and 1 postdoc, were feeling despondent, and they said, no, we're going to do something about it. You know how I found out about Stand Up for Science? I get a list every Tuesday of every single action I could do on any particular topic under threat. In the United States, I never see science in there, but I saw Stand Up for Science. I go, who is this? So I researched them a little bit. They didn't have much research. I thought, there's no way they're going to pull off rallies in a month. They have no experience. They've never done this before. Have they gotten a permit on the National Mall? Are they going to have the police out there? Do they know what they're doing? Well, lo and behold, it wasn't the same numbers as March for Science, but they actually were able to have several thousand people in Washington, D.C. I actually volunteered at the rally with them. My husband and I were both there. They had a stellar lineup of speakers that all of you would recognize if you saw the whole list of the names. They had over 100 of them across the country, and now in France, there's actually a Stand Up for Science France. There were several in Paris, they were over France, they were in Germany, so they did it. Since then, they've done end-of-class rallies on campuses. They're in the process of trying to get 500 to 1,000 letters into local newspapers and state-level newspapers. And anybody who wants to write it can submit their draft to a small group in Cornell and have them professionally edited so they have a greater chance of acceptance. And they've done an open letter to higher education to encourage everyone that's leading higher education institutions to stand up and have courage, like Harvard and Wesleyan and Princeton. Now, Some of the founders of Stand Up for Science in the last 4 weeks have started their new nonprofit because and I asked them, what would they like me to tell you about science societies in terms of this? And they said, we would like science societies to help lead a change in science that accepts, yes, everyone who goes through a science education needs to be a very, very excellent researcher, but also embrace those of us who want to do other roles with our scientific background. Embrace us, help us, encourage us. And they had some other things they said as well, such as, help me know my rights, because we're going to keep being very public. So they have 2 major projects underway already. One is this, what's the big idea? And their way of organizing to get their information and get support from the public is they want to create a platform for getting creative ideas. I can't wait to tell them about moms, because I think they may not know about that. Rather than try to create programs on their own, they want to create a platform for people to be creative under a structure. And they also have 2 policy research reports they're working on that I can't share with you yet, but they're going to be very good and they're very media worthy, so I hope they're able to do that. So I think there's threats from all of this to science societies. When resources get constrained and when things start to move outside the US, competition increases among the science societies. Relevance can also be questioned if members and those who participate in these science societies don't necessarily think they're being supported well enough. I worked in a science society. I worked at a medical research scientific society. We're US-centric in how we do our work in a global world of science. I mean, that's not a criticism, just we are. We know how to operate in the United States. But I don't know that we necessarily, and we know how to form partnerships, but I don't know that we really know how to operate in a global sense. Thinking globally, but enabling a lot of local action. And I've been doing a lot of consulting and governance in science societies. They're very slow to make decisions, and they're very risk averse. I mean, to get a letter out, in many of these science societies, they have to convene an executive committee and wait 2 weeks to be able to put anything in the press or to be able to even write a letter to Capitol Hill. This is not fast enough in this particular world. But what if the science societies, just like universities are doing and everybody else is doing, they could use this as an opportunity. I even have more ideas today based on the last several talks from today. But what if they thought, maybe we're not organized correctly as a science society enterprise? How could we do this different? We all spend a lot of infrastructure doing exactly the same thing. How could we think about that differently and be a common platform for the various disciplines to both collaborate but also do what they need to do for the deep research in their particular field? What if they thought about joint ventures, not just within the science societies, but maybe with some other nonprofits that are much better at science communication or more established in science communication than the science societies are? What if they created a consortium for upskilling in artificial intelligence and machine learning? What if they really thought about ways to lead the ethical considerations in using artificial intelligence, to be that good housekeeping seal of approval that we heard about earlier? They did it for fair data. They did it for sexual harassment and other forms of scientific misconduct. They could do that again today. What if they expanded their science support in the public around those networks that already exist, in addition to doing the particular training that they do on their own? They can increase investment in policy and advocacy. I quickly looked at five 990s of science societies. They have room to spend more and not risk their tax status. Most of them are under 30%, and they could start thinking about going to local and state policy apparatuses as well. And then for immediate support, what if they followed what hospitals and health systems did? 20, 30 years ago when Medicare was being cut back, and they created purchasing alliances so that the cost of materials and equipment and supplies were less overall than they would be if they were buying on their own, and really expanded legal and support services right now for that next generation. So a few thoughts, but of course in times like this, leadership is really important. And these kinds of characteristics of leadership are even more important. And we're so grateful, and we've all benefited from somebody that we know is a leader like that, and that's Margaret Leinen. So thank you, Margaret, very much. And thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts.
So that is the perfect segue to our student panel, which is going to be moderated by Jillian Maloney, who's a professor at San Diego State University and a Scripps alum. And we are going to hear from the next generation.
I'm Jillian. I am a professor at San Diego State, Earth and Environmental Sciences, and I was a graduate student here. And when I got invited to participate, I thought, oh, great. Margaret Leinen was so influential to me when I was a student at Scripps, and then I looked, and Margaret was appointed in July of 2013 and started in October of 2013, which is the month that I defended my dissertation and I left SIO. So I didn't actually get to benefit directly from all of Margaret's contributions, but I think what was going on there was that it was so meaningful to me to see such an accomplished and respected woman step into that role as director at that time in my career, that it stuck with me. And so I'm certain that I'm not the only one who has been influenced by Margaret without her knowing it. And I'm grateful to be here. I feel honored to hold this space for these current graduate students to get their perspective as they are the future of oceanography. So we've talked a little. They're going to introduce themselves, something about your research, and your experience at Scripps to start us off.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, my name's Marissa Sanger. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in climate science here at Scripps. And I study large-scale climate interventions involving reflecting sunlight, also called solar geoengineering, sort of these stopgap proposals to avert warming while society works to curb emissions. And I focus on what are the physical consequences as well as social responses and perceptions. And yeah, I've spent a few years on the Graduate Student Council. I've done some volunteer teaching at middle schools, and yeah, other stuff that has been really impactful.
Cool. Hi there. I'm Ben Taylor. I am a fifth year, also in climate science, but I work with Lynn Talley and Shangping Xie, so I do a lot of large-scale physical oceanography, and then how that impacts tracers. Yes, at the risk of talking a lot about myself, I grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia, did physics in undergrad, and sort of hit a wall of like, there's got to be more than this, Lord. There's got to be something that I really want to study for a long time, and I kind of found that in oceanography. Kind of after graduating and got hooked. Scripps is definitely the dream school, so it's been really sweet. I'm a fifth year, so hopefully wrapping up in a couple months, assuming that I'm able to find something to do after that, but happy to hang out here until then. Yeah, so my research lab focuses on sort of deploying BGC Argo floats and doing modeling and other projects associated with that. So I've been funded through the SOCOM program for a really long time now, including even before I started here. So a bit about that, I think it's been touched on by Joellen, who's a colleague, I guess, in that program, but the floats that measure these key macro parameters in the carbon system, they're autonomous, so we can deploy them out in the middle of the ocean and sort of get a wide spatial coverage of the global ocean, which is not something we've had on these at least 10-day or so reasonably short timescales sort of ever. And it's enabled there to be a lot of growth in sort of improving models and also AI estimates of what does the current state of the ocean look like from a macrochemical perspective and thinking about the carbon system. Also something that's kind of at risk at the moment, can we keep this set of infrastructure to measure the state of the ocean, state of the ocean carbon uptake in particular. So that's a big question, not my job, but my advisor's job, so it's important stuff. My piece of that, to nerd out a little bit, is really on the modeling side. So I'm looking at these big trends, especially over multi-decadal, so sort of since we've had serious measurements in the 60s, and then how has the ocean changed from then until now. And my angle is kind of like to what degree are there circulation changes in the large-scale ocean currents that are due particularly to increased addition of heat and freshwater at the surface, and so then how things like overturning change or also change in vertical structure of the wind-driven circulation due to increased stratification, how have those already, and then how may they in the future lead to changes in heat transport and sort of all these processes, all the chemicals that life needs to function in the ocean, and then the climate at large. I guess I'd finish up as saying it's been a real gift to be part of this program with this big observing system. It's opened up a lot of doors. I do mostly models and sitting at a computer, but I was able to go out in the middle of the ocean and be on a boat in the middle of the South Atlantic where no one ever is, and see an iceberg and all these things that would not have happened had I not been able to come here and study here at a PhD program, and then also was able to attend COP and share about this in sort of a large scale. Again, something that I would not have been able to do probably in most other places, so very thankful for these opportunities. Thanks.
Hey everyone, I'm Ralph. I'm a PhD candidate who's also hopefully graduating towards the end of the summer. I'm in the Marine Chemistry and Geochemistry department under Lahini Aluihari. And my research really is using high-resolution mass spectrometry to kind of understand the role organic molecules are playing in ocean cycling. So kind of part one of my research, I'm really kind of looking at the natural environment, carbon and nutrient cycling, and organic matter as a reservoir is just extremely interesting. There's substrates that are cycling on extremely fast timescales, fueling production, fueling different ecological interactions. But then on the same side, you have these substrates that appear to be intrinsically recalcitrant, and they're persisting for millennia. I kind of do this work through the California Current Ecosystem Long-Term Ecological Research Program. It's a mouthful, CCELTR. And I believe someone said that being on a boat is sort of like a moving prison. It must be a European prison because I fell in love with it. Yeah, I haven't looked back. Although kind of my second part of my research involves looking at coastal pollutants here off of San Diego's coast. Kind of in that same vein, I'm looking at those pollutants that cycle fast, that degrade, but then also those that persist within kind of our natural marine environments. Scripps has been incredible for me. I was involved in the summer graduate teaching scholar program where I got to actually teach my own undergraduate undergraduate course, introductory oceanography course under Sarah Gilly. Yeah, I always thought I loved teaching, but it just reinforced that for me. I've also been involved in a lot of the mentoring programs here at Scripps, the REU program specifically, JT Surf, and also the CCELTR REU program, which has been amazing, being able to actually kind of be the mentor rather than the mentee. And then I'm also involved in some communications outreach stuff. So I just really want to thank the SIO Comm office. I don't know if she's still here, but Nan Renner has introduced me to, at Birch Aquarium, has introduced me to so many amazing people, including representatives of the Kumeyaay Nation, and I've been able to do various volunteering efforts with different communities around San Diego. And lastly, I just want to shout out the Ocean Discovery Institute. I was introduced to them also through a professor here at Scripps. And they're just this after-school program for students living in City Heights. And it's an amazing program. They're trying to empower youth through science and getting them to pursue higher education. And we just had a graduation last week of the high school seniors who were involved in that program, not their school, but of the program. And all of them are going to college in some way or form. But really, Scripps introduced me to, like I said, so many different avenues. And yeah.
Hi. Am I good distance? Okay. My name is Anya Steiner. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate here at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I'm part of the Biological Oceanography Department, and I work with Dr. Moira Decima. Broadly, I would say that I study zooplankton ecology, but if we're trying to zoom in a little bit, I would say I really am trying to develop bioindicators for global change. And particularly, I'm using this amazing animal called the pteropod or sea butterfly. Perhaps you've heard of it or seen cute little videos of them flying around. But I use sea butterflies and their fragile aragonite shells as bioindicators for ocean acidification. And throughout my time here and the remaining time that I have, I'm trying to use different perspectives to gain an understanding of how these really sensitive organisms will respond to ocean acidification, and then how we can sort of extrapolate our findings to understand who will be affected next. And I'm doing that from multiple perspectives. I'm taking a molecular approach, I'm taking a traditional ecological approach, and then sort of a morphometric approach, looking at physical shell dissolution. And Scripps has just been the most wonderful place to pursue this type of work. I've been able to collaborate with oceanographers, marine biologists, look at biophysical interactions, and it's all helped to really strengthen my work, which is important to me because I care about people, plankton, and the planet, and so I want to make sure that my research sort of touches all of those bases. I've also had the amazing opportunity being at Scripps to take part in SCOPE, which is the Scripps Community Outreach for Public Education group here. So I'm one of the 5 co-coordinators, and we're trying to start addressing some of the things that our earlier panelists talked about, bridging that gap between scientists and the people. So we welcome in groups from all walks of life. Sometimes we get, lifelong learning groups or elementary school students or, Boy Scout and Girl Scout troops, and they come to Scripps and they visit, and we give them tours at the pier, beach geology, we connect them with the collections, and so it's been just incredible to be at an institution that people have trust in, and I'm proud to hopefully continue that legacy. And before I pass it on, I just do want to say that I'm very humbled to be part of the future of oceanography and speak at this panel in honor of Margaret, who has just been such a icon, I guess, to look at as a graduate student. So thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Wood, and I'm a 5th-year PhD candidate in marine biology. And I just want to start by thanking the organizers for having me. It's really exciting to be on this panel today. My research focuses on harmful algal blooms. So in the past couple of months, if you've heard about all of the poison sea lions that have been washing up on the California beaches, I study that phenomenon. So I study these diatoms called Pseudonychia that produce a potent neurotoxin called domoic acid. And my PhD has really leveraged the discovery of domoic acid biosynthesis that was discovered here at Scripps in the labs of Andy Allen and Brad Moore, where I work now, to sort of build upon that by studying Pseudonychia in the lab, so generating a lot of genomic data, and then translating that to the environment. So going out on various research cruises and collecting multi-omics data to sort of try and track, put together this tough puzzle that is the toxin to the genes that are responsible for toxin production with the oceanographic parameters, and sort of piece together a picture of why this might be happening at the scale that we're currently seeing it. So Scripps has been, was definitely part of the dream. I was a undergraduate NOAA Halling Scholar, so where I studied Pseudonychia blooms. So it was fun to, I was really invested in coming to Scripps, and working on this particular project was definitely the dream for me. And I've been really lucky to be part of this project and interact with folks that are here today, like Clarissa Anderson from SCOOS, folks at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, and various people here, various different labs here at Scripps. So it's been a very collaborative effort on this project. So I've been exposed to a lot of different opportunities. So.
Wow, you guys. You're accomplishing so much, it's amazing. And I think maybe, we just saw a couple talks about the current state of science and threats. And so I was hoping you could maybe share how you are experiencing what's going on right now. And in particular, if you had any ideas about what your mentors or senior scientists or the scientific community could be doing to support you. I hear that you're doing research and outreach, and we have lots of different facets of what you're working on right now. So in any way, what would be helpful for you, and how's it going?
Thanks. Sure. I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think the main thing for me is that I really believe as scientists, we owe it to the public and to the world to also be activists, especially now. And so we really can't afford to stay in our lane just as researchers when, it's not just science that's under threat, but, there's nothing apolitical about why we are studying what we're studying, right? There's nothing apolitical about the climate crisis being where it's at, and how, all of what we are studying is affected by climate change. So I think, we really need to be very politically engaged, and I've been really inspired seeing a lot of my colleagues here finding ways to do that. And connecting dots between things like the climate crisis and the genocide in Palestine. These things are all very deeply connected, and we can't ignore that, even if we are just earth scientists. I think someone else mentioned Nan. Nan Renner at the aquarium has been a big role model for me as an activist and someone who gives PhD students opportunities to get involved in the community, not just as scientists, but as activists, but most importantly as both. And so, yeah, I think that's something I've been thinking about a lot. And like I said, I've been teaching lessons in middle schools on climate change, and I'm teaching a climate change and society class for undergrads this summer. And, I think education is one way that I can offer young people as much as I'm able to in navigating an increasingly unstable and frankly scary world. I think science education is a really good first start. but also like political education is an essential part of that. It's not something we can leave out. So yeah, I think that I see ways that that's starting to happen here, and I'm really inspired by all of that, and that's just something I would really love to see more of, and I'm trying to find ways to do more of myself.
Yeah, thanks, Marissa. Yeah, there's a lot there, big question. And yeah, it's challenging. I don't really know what will happen next. Obviously, there's a lot that everyone can't control. So you have to trust a little bit. I'd say, in addition to that, right, it's like the world was very political. I think from like a science perspective, I mean, one thing that's comforting is that, like on a global scale, the questions that we're asking are really important, and I think there's a lot of inherent value in them, and how that gets translated into sort of monetary support. There's a lot of different ways that could look like, and maybe there's a lot of opportunities to be flexible and creative and do things differently than we have in the past. I don't know a whole lot about exactly what that looks like, but a lot of people have done this for a while, and so I'm, I guess in that way, optimistic that there'll be some like new avenues and new ways of partnership, and ways of like making the connections, like both in our research and like personally, like in terms of communicating and being in channels where the communication to the rest of society is much more frequent, and also the feedback between users of information that we're creating and the scientists themselves are sort of more commonly traveled, or I think building a workplace, an environment where that is like really prioritized is exciting, also really challenging, also, you know, like I don't have a lot of practical, I think, sense of what that looks like. It's a couple thoughts. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add, but maybe, you know, it's tough, the state we're in currently, you know. Not only, I think a lot of us are kind of getting ready to graduate, and, you know, the job prospects are quite bleak. It's not just that, you know, funding is going down, you know, there's a lot of hiring freezes, which means, you know, as we're looking into maybe postdocs or an industry position, there's a lot more kind of more senior people above us also applying for those same jobs, where maybe in the past a lot of them would be receiving those various faculty jobs and other jobs. So it's, you know, just supporting your students still. I'm guessing a lot of us are kind of taking an approach of, you know, apply broadly, apply everywhere. But yeah, it's tough what to do in the short term, but I definitely agree, like, let's not stay silent. I think activism is, you know, extremely important, and you know, the public, you know, we saw these amazing presentations about, you know, maybe public perception isn't as bad as we think it is, and just continue to kind of target, you know, maybe groups that are a little, you know, jaded or not trusting in science, and just trying to find new creative ways to reach those communities. I do not really know how to do that, but yeah, I think, you know, just not being complacent, and yeah.
I have one more thought I'd love to throw in to this discussion about what to do during such a, you know, uncertain time. Well, if you are not like me, and maybe you're a little further along in your career, and you have, you know, mentees or people beneath you that are looking up to you, I think that this is the perfect time for you to just encourage them. There's this amazing, like, sort of social experiment done by social scientists that, takes a bunch of people, and half of the people are tasked to do a maze as a cartoon mouse. And though the people on one side, their cartoon mouse has a little cartoon cheese at the end as a reward. And then the other group has a cartoon mouse and the maze, and they're being pursued by a scary cartoon owl. And the group that is pursuing the cartoon cheese is more likely to complete the maze, make less mistakes, and do all of this faster than the group who is being chased by the cartoon owl. And so if our brains are so susceptible to, either rewards or fears as mild as a piece of cartoon cheese or a cartoon owl, imagine what, a PhD student or a young career scientist is going through with when there's very little certainty in the, career that they've just dumped 5 years into. So if you find yourself in a position of power, be that cheese, be the cartoon cheese to your students, to your mentees, to your community, and just encourage them. I'm sure that, if you're further along in your career, you have faced challenges and you have overcome them, and now it's our turn to overcome our challenges. And so just being a listening ear, validating that this is a stressful time for students, and telling them, you have got this, move forward, you will find a way to make it work, I think is going to go the distance. I know, having an advisor that's encouraging me is helping me keep my head up in these times. And so, yeah, just a reminder that even if it feels like a simple thing to do, it does go far to support the future of oceanography. Thank you. Yeah.
Treating each other with, a modicum of humanity.
Yes, yeah. We're all smart, but we should all try and be nice, too.
Stephanie, did you want to comment at all?
I'm not sure if there's too much more to add on top of that, to be honest with you.
Okay. I think we have a little bit more time. Right, it's challenging. And I appreciate, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'm wondering now if maybe you might share something that you're finding joy in, something that you're excited about or hopeful for, maybe something about the program that was, super impactful for you. Anything like that you could share would be awesome. If you have something. Take joy in right now.
Sure, yeah. I mean, going off of what I said earlier, I am really finding a ton of joy and deriving a lot of energy from activism and right now teaching. I was in middle school classrooms just this morning, and the kids respond really well to making learning about these things fun and making them feel like they have some agency. So I didn't teach just about ocean warming and ocean acidification. I also talked to them about how to get involved as an activist, as a youth activist, and they seemed really excited, and maybe that was just my perception, but that keeps me going at the very least. And I was at a march with Nan and probably some others here for climate justice just last weekend, and there was so much of a sense of community there, and so many different groups came together, and the organization was incredible. It was led by youth. And so, I felt like an old person, like being there for the kids. And that, I think that stuff is really firing me up right now. And I also feel like the research I'm doing here at Scripps as a scientist, as well as how I'm, building out my values in activism and teaching are especially important right now. So even though it's particularly challenging at this moment, it feels, extra meaningful. And so that's bringing me joy.
Yeah, totally. So beautiful. Anytime you can connect what you care about to what other people care about, it's like the spark, right? I mean, we all need that. Again, totally nerdy example jumped to mind, but this oxygen research where I'm like getting the physical oceanography and like bringing it to the oxygen people, and they're like, wow, this is like so exciting. It's like, it just, seeing other people be like curious and excited about the same things that you are when they're like very sort of obscure, but also maybe, you know, maybe they're important. It's a fun culmination to be able to work with a bunch of really curious and excited people here.
Yeah, on the, I guess, research side, you know, just all the really interesting innovations we're making. We've been kind of characterizing organic molecules in kind of a novel way using this bioinformatic approach. And some of the like results we've been seeing are super cool, potentially groundbreaking, but maybe I shouldn't get there that quite yet. And always, just to reiterate, you know, what Marissa was saying too, teaching, mentoring, I think I derive, the most joy out of those things, as I'm sure many of you do as well. And I just wanted to tell kind of a story about, I think, my most positive experience at Scripps, which was I was able to go to Aslo in Mallorca, Spain. But not only was I able to go, which was funded by the SIO department, by the way, but my REU student, who I was mentoring, got an Aslo multicultural travel grant. And so we were able to both go together. And so just seeing collaboration, mentorship, you know, it makes me hopeful for the future that people aren't going to sit down. They're going to support their students. They're going to support their colleagues moving forward. So, yeah.
I love that. I was also going to say mentorship in some way, shape, or form. So now I'll think of a different example of what's been bringing me joy. And I don't know if anyone has had a chance to walk on the beach in the last couple weeks here, but there are a ton of Velela on the shores. And if you don't know what a Velela is, it's also known as a by-the-wind sailor, but it's a type of zooplankton. And like I said earlier, I study zooplankton, and that's sort of a class of animals that is generally unseen to the public. And Velela was actually the first zooplankton I studied as an undergrad, and I consider it my gateway zooplankton. So when I take a walk on the beach and I see people of all ages, you know, whether they live in San Diego or they're a tourist or whatever, picking up these little creatures and handling them and being curious, it just brings me so much joy, because it reminds me that even in a time that we feel really divided about stuff like science, there is still a common curiosity, and that as long as we can always try and bring it back to our common values of, you know, beauty and community and cool things on the beach, then I think in the end we'll be okay. And that's been bringing me a lot of joy these last 100 days.
Yeah, I'll echo some of that, but on a slightly less fun note, I think, you know, the current domoic acid event that has been ongoing here in California has been motivating in a less fun way, for sure. It's, you know, been heartbreaking to see the negative effects, especially on marine mammals here, but is a good motivator for me to remind, you know, to keep going in the work that I'm doing, seeing that, you know, fisheries closures and all of this sort of stuff that has been happening. But it's been motivating, though maybe not bringing me joy, though the research, you know, I find a lot of joy in, but going out and having the opportunity to sample the bloom has also, doing a lot of field work is a lot of fun, and knowing that you're out there while what you're studying is actively happening is pretty exciting, all things considered. And being able, you know, now towards the end of my PhD, also hopefully wrapping up soon, organizing a lot of that field work and driving that effort and being persistent and making sure that we're still making it happen despite everything that's been going on lately. And another thing that has been bringing me joy is seeing, some of my advisors and other leaders, really setting that tone. For example, the UCSD Breakthrough Campaign that has launched recently. My advisor, Brad Moore, had the first video that went out, which was really inspiring to see that sort of example being set, just within our lab culture, and then being, publicized through UCSD's channels has been really rewarding.
Thank you. My kids were just playing with Villela on the beach yesterday. Maybe it'll be their gateway zooplankton, I don't know.
I hope so.
Okay, so, several of you are close to being finished. I wonder if you could share where you hope to go, maybe short-term, long-term, what you want to do with your degree from Scripps. Or something else.
Yeah, I've gotten pretty excited about teaching, and I've been grateful for having a lot of different opportunities, like being a TA and the summer grad teaching scholars program. So that's what I think I can. That's how I think I can offer the most to society right now. We'll see. I have a little bit more time.
No, same. Yeah, I'd love to stay in an academic space, interacting with young people and mentoring. That is fun. Beyond that, it's kind of standard. I'd love to do a postdoc. I'd love to study carbon uptake, kind of along the track of what I've been doing, working with models, improving them. Yeah.
Yeah, short term, a little bleak, but yeah, trying to find different postdoc opportunities. But long term, I do want to stay in academia, particularly more at a primarily undergrad institute. But I'm not quite done with research. There's just too many interesting things that still appeal to me. But yeah.
For me, I love doing research. I love teaching, and having undergraduate students here has really affirmed that for me. And I also think it's so important to be involved in your community. And so I think that the epitome of all of those things is potentially being a professor at a research university, or maybe even undergraduate focused university. So I think one way or another, I'd like to stay involved with academia. And importantly, I'd like to, use whatever future position I end up in as a sort of launch pad to stay connected with my community.
Yeah, I'm also looking for different postdoc positions. It has been particularly bleak, looking for different opportunities, and almost feeling guilty asking if anyone is interested in hiring a postdoc. So if you know of anyone, definitely let us know. With that said, I really came to Scripps to learn different skills, to study this larger phenomenon of harmful algal blooms, and sort of build a skill set to bring that to environmental monitoring and governmental and state agencies, which is not seeming particularly available right now. But I think, I think the nice thing also about being here at Scripps, despite that, is the connection to to the government. That is NOAA, that's right here. As well as industry that's here in San Diego, and in the hopes that sort of moving forward in the current climate environment, that going to industry, coming back to academia it's not necessarily closing a door back to academia, given the limited opportunities that are available at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I think we have one more question. I want to open it up to you all. If there's anything that you want to share with this community here, maybe something you saw today that was exciting, or I don't know, any last minute thoughts that you have about your experience or your future in oceanography. That's really wide open, sorry.
I don't think I have much more to add. I loved the Science for Good project that Christine shared about. And yeah, definitely drew a lot of inspiration from the folks up here.
Kind of want to start climate dads. I don't know.
Yeah, that CDR panel was very engaging and cool. Let me go up closer. Sorry, that CDR panel was very engaging and cool. That was an honor to be a witness to that. But yeah, just that, this is a celebration of you, Margaret, and everything you've been involved in has really, in terms of Scripps and all these little programs, it's not just the research, it's the outreach, it's getting involved in the political sphere. The amount of students that Scripps sends to COP every year is just incredible. And I have a lot of friends who have just been forever changed by that experience. And so I just wanted to kind of end with, I know there's all these, budget constraints and everything that's going on, but I just wanted to emphasize the importance that, all of these seemingly little programs, these seemingly little outreach components that Scripps is involved in, just how much that influences students' lives and kind of their outlook moving forward and into the future. So, yeah.
What to say? So I don't really know what else to add, so I'll tell a little story. I don't know Margaret that well. I mean, she probably knows me now that I've spoken at her panel, and maybe before. But being in oceanography, when I was a kid, my family, they don't do oceanography. My dad does IT, my mom stayed at home, and so I sort of wound up in oceanography by seeing people on TV or going to the aquarium. And so it's not like I had one person who took me all the way here. My journey to oceanography has been what I've gleaned from people along the way. And one of those people has definitely been Margaret. She may not remember this interaction, but we did have a donors event with my lab, must have been a year or so ago. And Margaret trickled through while we were all giving our talks at our stations, and I felt my heart beat a little faster knowing that she was gonna be watching me speak. And at the end of the event, when we were all mingling and chatting, she came on over to me and she told me that I did a great job speaking, and that really meant the world to me. There are so many amazing people at Scripps and doing this kind of work, and to feel seen by somebody who has done such amazing things for this institution that I'm proud to be a part of was so important to me. And I think this just kind of ties back into that cartoon cheese I was talking about. Margaret was definitely the cheese for me, and I hope that I can be the cheese for someone else. And now I fear I've been too cheesy, so I'm gonna pass this on.
What I would like to add here is that I think in the recent months I've been also, similar to what has been said here, called to be a bit more vocal about the work that I do, and considering more formal channels for making that happen, especially for young scientists. I started my PhD during the pandemic in 2020, and so the connection to the Scripps community here was, I think, slower, and some of those opportunities sort of came about a bit more slowly than perhaps the average Scripps student, but sort of making those channels a bit more formal. So in those times that will hopefully never happen again, are more accessible. But I also, in honor of Margaret here, I remember the few times I have interacted with Margaret, we were at a prospective student event and asked her what advice she would have for the prospective students who are sitting with us. And she was so kind and candid in her advice to these students. And the next day she was leaving for Sacramento to be advocating for our funding. But she was, in the moment and here giving very honest and kind and generous, advice to the prospective students. And I was personally floored. I was like, wow. I thought of it as an example to how to provide mentorship myself when I'm interacting with students, especially in these very anxiety-provoking times. So thank you for that.
Okay, so I want to thank all of you so much for serving on the panel, and all of the work that you're doing is amazing. I think, the future of oceanography is in excellent hands up here. And, we now all have our directive to be the cheese. So thank you so much. And we'll move on to our next talk now. Thank you.
So our final speaker today is going to be Rita Colwell. She hardly needs an introduction. She's got a legendary scientific career and also as an administrator at NSF. So Rita, she's going to tell us about past, present, and future of oceanography.
First of all, the day has been spectacular, and the final session is really terrific. I want to tell the students that the past wasn't so great, really. Women weren't allowed to go on oceanographic research vessels when I was a graduate student. I was one of 2, I think, in something like 50 students, so things have changed. I'd like to close on with an upbeat sort of presentation. I think science definitely is changing. It's probably, I wouldn't call on this kind of disruption that we're experiencing as the way to do it, but I do think that we are at a kind of a fork in the road for science, in that I think it is much more interdisciplinary and problem solving that we need to deal with. And I'm going to not talk about my research, which I've already done a few weeks ago when I was here for a colloquium, but I want to talk about an example that I think is where the science is going to be going. And that is, let's see, I just go press forward. I don't want to do the wrong thing here. Having watched the wrong things, good. I would have done the wrong thing. Thank you. I want to talk about the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. And I didn't say the Gulf of America, I said the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. And it's a way of doing research, NSF, NIH, DOE type, NASA type of research, but in an applied way. What happened was in 2010, there was the disastrous oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And that was in the early months of 2010. And the British Petroleum Company immediately volunteered. This wasn't a fine or a court order or anything. They, within weeks of that horrible spill of millions of gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, they set aside $500 million over a 10-year period. Fortuitously, the person who, well, not fortuitous for her, the person who was the chief scientist had just been hired, and within 3 weeks of being chief scientist, this oil spill occurred. She had been a professor of physics at University of Maryland, and she called me as the former past president, or director rather, of the National Science Foundation, to put together a research team to be in charge of this $500 million that would be $50 million a year for 10 years. Now, in the past, about maybe 50 years ago, there had been an attempt at NSF, something called RAN. I think only us old guys will remember it. Research applied to national need. But it was done very poorly. It was done in an immediate application without considering any other aspects of the science to be done. The GOMRI, I think, is how industry, foundations, academia, and society can work together to solve problems and to understand life on this planet and beyond in space, as we've been hearing today, and to understand how basic research can be employed to solve societal problems. So fundamental research as well as application, I think, need to be intertwined as we demonstrated. And let me give you some of the details of this journey that some of us went on. First of all, I would like to remember the victims. There were people who died. They lost their lives in the oil spill. And they died so that we could live more prosperously, more healthily, more wisely. And we've recognized the Darwins, the Einsteins, the leaders and heroes of the past, but we neglect to pay homage to those who do the daily work, the tedious work, and yes, those who give their lives as well, the workers, laborers, domestics who stand in pride themselves in the achievements that we do as scientists. So our challenge as a team is to do the work of all of society. Now, what I would like to say that the mission of the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative was established together with BP. In other words, we worked out, even though this was money that was probably a gift of guilt, so to speak, because of a terrible spill, one might say it was also a conscience-stricken payment to society for sloppiness, for proceeding without the basic knowledge needed about the environment, about living systems. And so we can look at it as sort of stumbling into discovery of new knowledge, and now it's providing a paradigm of how we can do basic research, benefit humanity and our home planet. So the structure is quite simple and very straightforward. The $500 million was provided by BP, and that was $50 million every year. The research board, which was put together, comprised 20 academic professionals, at least half of whom were from the Gulf Coast universities. But the key was totally independent operation by the research board. BP, together with BP, we established what we would be studying, but after that, how we did it and how we spent the money, aside from not wasting it or misspending it, was entirely up to the research board. And so the research board established that we would follow NSF protocol. That was well understood by all academic researchers and by the public in general. And we would use the National Academy of Science, what it is to be a scientist, as the rules that we would follow as the scientists who were participating. And the mission was agreed upon, 5 research themes appropriate to solve the problem that had been created. And we had a master research agreement that allowed us to operate within the confines of the funding mission. This was the dedicated board of 20 who gave very generously of their time for 10 years. We met several times a year over this 10-year period. The most important person, as far as I was concerned, was our vice chair. I'll quote from a fellow board member, John Farrington, who's already spoken earlier, because you'll think I'm biased, whereas John was the so-called historian of the Gulf of Mexico Initiative, very forthright and very direct. And he said that, and I called him, and I made notes, and I asked him, what should I say about Margaret, who was terrific, but if I say it, you know, I'm biased, but tell me what the board thinks. And he said, well, Margaret did research on number of ships and she convinced the old salts that she knew what she was doing. So, in fact, she was accepted. And in addition, Margaret was terrific in making clear that she was a wise person who listened, gathered information, gathered people together, and in short, in other times would stand in the back of the room and just listen. So as a matter of her character and her perseverance, she provided the perfect leader. So those are John's words, not mine, and I agree with them. Now, the research themes are applied, yes they are, or yes they were, I should say, but they had truly basic fundamental mechanisms to be driving them. And so this wasn't a fix-it shop, but understanding the basic driving principles around the physical distribution of oil, the chemical evolution, biological degradation, etc. And so in making the grants from the $50 million, we established the protocol of NSF. Proposals would come in, be reviewed, and then go to a panel who would make the final selection. And the grants were awarded from experts who around the country. And the Gulf institutions did most of the work, but the participation included scientists from the rest of the country and from other countries as well. So it was an international operation, heavily focused and directed within the Gulf of Mexico. The data management was collaborative. It wasn't mean-spirited in any way. It was very effective. And all the information was banked for easy access for distribution to peer scientists and to the public and the layman alike. And so the insistence of VP, with which we totally agreed, was that all the data would be data banked, and it still is data banked. It will be data banked for another number of years. And it is available and it is being used, as I'll point out shortly. But maintaining all of the data sets was one of the important directions for the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. The data center remains a living archive, just as it was intended. And this is a little bit out of date. It's only a few months old, but data keeps coming in from researchers who continue to publish. And we retain sufficient funding to be able to pay for the publications that are continuing from the data that were gathered during that 10-year period. Now, this is the very, very important part of the program. From the very, very beginning, we had the public involved. When the spill occurred, it was devastating. The beaches were covered with oil. The fishermen lost their occupation for at least a year or two. And so our first meeting with the scientists who were going to be funded, there was a community group that showed up, but we had included them in all of the communications. And we had town halls and interviews on TV. And after, I think, the second year, the public, the first year we had our meeting in New Orleans, there was a group of citizens who came and spoke very strongly. But we interacted, explained exactly what we were intending to do and how we were going to do it. And the next year, there were just a few, and then the fact that we continued to provide through engaging the Sea Grant College program, which had very good connections with the communities along the Gulf, we were able then to transmit information exactly about what we were doing and how the work was being done, so that the public was involved from the very, very beginning of the whole program. In addition, we engaged filmmakers, a very talented team who came in and documented how we were doing the science, and we ended up making 3 documentaries that were shown on public television. And from the filming that was done, about 28 videos were prepared. And these were actually more than that, I think more like 50 or 60. And these have been distributed to schools, grade schools, and have been used in teaching. So after the second year of interactions, because we shared everything, we experienced cooperation, support, and even useful suggestions from the public. So what we did produce are some very interesting metrics. Over the 10 years that we were in operation, there were 4,500, about 5,000 scientists and staff from the Gulf and from elsewhere in the US and from other countries who participated in the research. There were 300 research projects and about 1,000 sub-awards. And I think what's fascinating is that more than almost 3,000 now peer-reviewed publications, 7 books, 105 book chapters. These are the standard expectations of scientists working in the laboratory and in the field. Most of the researchers were from the Gulf of Mexico region, so it offered an opportunity to capacity build for the Gulf region. And the important thing is, especially in this current discussion of overhead, the overhead, total overhead was at most 10%, be 10 to 0.2%. However, I think it's important to add that we were funding university consortia, and therefore there was the university facilities made available. I think when you take that into account, interestingly, I calculate the overhead total would be about 25%, which is kind of interesting to throw out because this is a 10-year experiment, and those are data that we can actually share to the discussion of that. I think it's important to point out as well, or reinforce, the documentary films, which are very, very useful for teaching because they show how field work is actually done, because the filming was done with the students and faculty who are out in the field on the boats, taking samples, collecting specimens, etc. Then the publications continue. The major areas are physical, chemistry, physics, etc. The chemical aspects of the spill and the environment. The one area that we found that we discovered there's really a dearth of information is in public health. That is the impact, the sociological and the impact of the well-being of the communities. That was the area where it was difficult to actually get good proposals coming in to be funded because it really is a new area of science that needs to be developed. And that's something that we learned from the work that we were doing over that 10-year period. So the breakdown of the expenditure shows that the bulk of the money, almost all the money, went into research. It went into the data gathering, collection, storage, and the interpretation of the research as well. We worked really hard to keep the administration costs down, and I think the way that all of this breaks down provides a useful experience on which I think the science will be going in the next decade or so. The core areas where we spent most of the funds for research are shown here. Particularly of interest was the oil plumes and the fate of the oil, what effects the oil had on the environment, and the human health and socioeconomic impacts. As you can see, we focused in the areas that we agreed upon, but interestingly, we decided very early on that we needed to synthesize everything that we had done, because at the end of 10 years, the first question that would be asked, well, you just spent $500 million, $500 million, and you've been working for 10 years. What have you learned? What have you done? And so we immediately, in about the 7th year of the work, put our minds to determining what was the state of the science, the baseline before the spill. What have we learned? Critically, what can we say that we have contributed, and what are the gaps in knowledge that remain even though this work was put in place? And how can we really apply this that we have found? So we worked on doing that by having a number of workshops, bringing people together, and publications that synthesized the findings. And it was not just the science, but also the outreach that was really critical, the societal implications and the benefits. And so the information dissemination was clear. We needed to tell the public ourselves what had been accomplished. And we needed to do it in a way that it would be understood by the public. And so these were the various scientific means of conveying information. In addition, we had a complete volume of articles that describe the Gomery research, and it's fully open access. And this publication will be followed this September by a book which describes the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. And for the new world of science that we're now sliding into, I think this will provide a kind of a Bible, if you will, of how you can do science in this new world. The book, I think, it gives all the details of how we organized the initiative, how we made the awards, how we synthesized the findings, and it gives all the details of how this new type of research was carried out. It's totally a multi-dimensional conclusion of the work. Now, you may ask, what did we learn? Here's just a few examples of the findings, some surprises really, from the science that we did. We particularly learned about the effect of gas-saturated oil and refinements of transport modeling. Some interesting findings about photooxidation of petroleum compounds at the ARC interface. And particularly of interest to me as a microbiologist, we found that the microorganisms, if left alone and perhaps enriched, would do a much better job than adding detergents, which only create more problems. And that was done quite definitively. And we also have been monitoring instances of the fisheries and ecosystem, and scientists in the Gulf discovered some new species, describe the populations much more thoroughly. And the oil and gas droplet subsurface dynamics were tracked. So a lot of really good fundamental research was carried out. We also recognized that we weren't perfect but we did make some mistakes, or I'd put it this way. We learned some things that we have some specific recommendations for future research, and these are just a few examples. For example, we do need to have better methods for observing and modeling velocity profiles in water of the droplets. Field measurements, especially when the attempts were made to burn the spilled oil, this created much more serious problems, but we documented it so that if they're in a future spill, we'll be able to use all of that we have learned to reduce potential impact. I think the major gap that we learned, I've already mentioned, is that the future research in public health, in the socio-economic aspects of environment, is critical. And that I think we should be looking toward the future of science that I think will be fundable, will be that which includes, it's interdisciplinary, includes social scientists, behavioral scientists, and economists at the get-go, not waiting until you get the results and then try to figure out how it can be used. From the get-go, if you have the involvement of the community, of the voters, if they feel that they at least can see how the decisions are being made, and perhaps even participate if they have some wisdom to share, that this will go a long, long way in the communication that's needed. And we need communication specialists working in the very beginning as well. Because we scientists are not the best communicators, and we're desperately trying to learn, but that doesn't necessarily make sense. In other words, we need interdisciplinary teamwork, planning the experiments, planning the work that's to be done. And I think this boils down to the new kind of science that is needed, which is systems, AI included, as we've already been discussing today, but including the social, behavioral, economic scientists in the planning from the beginning. It sort of reminds me when starting with a graduate student, I've graduated enough of them to know that when they come in, they say, you ask them what they would like to do, being a microbiologist, and they'll say something like, well, I want to help cure cancer. I said, well, let's start with a little small problem that will get you there. So I think we are now in the 21st century where we need to have teamwork in the research that we're going to be carrying out. Now, you may be saying, well, that was all well and good in the sense that there were $500 million. Is this going to happen again? Well, it just happens that today, quite ironically, a message from the president of Purdue University is announcing a $250 million 8-year gift from Eli Lilly to collaborate with Purdue to carry out medical research. So I think it's happening, and I think we need to think about it. And what I've heard today is absolutely perfect for an interdisciplinary teamwork to be done on fundamental research of our environment, our oceans, and how they interact with human health. I can't think of a better program that you should present to Google or the Gates Foundation. In other words, I think this is an opportunity, as my dad would say, make a little lemonade, lady. Those lemons can be useful. So we have a time that we're in where I think we can take advantage of what we consider to be a disadvantage, but this fits with the message of those wonderful students who said, look, let's look forward, let's not look back. And finally, I would like to say that the legacy from the research included not just publications, but 1,400 master's and doctoral students who were funded. It includes a data system that's still maintained by one of the Texas universities. And connection between oil spill responders, academia, and industry, I think is the way we're going to be doing research in the future. And there were many outreach products. And finally, I would like to thank the family that was formed. We still maintain complete, full connections. David Halpern, are you still here? He was one of my, there you are, one of the Gulf of Mexico board members, and our chair, Margaret. But this was the community that worked together over this 10-year period and continues for another, I think, 4 or 5 years to make sure that all of the output continues to be presented to the scientific community, but also to the public. So, Margaret, it was great working with you for that 10 years, and let's hope that we will find something in the future. We'll do another 10-year project. So with that, I'd like to thank you, but I want you to think that this may be the way we're going to go in the future. And one last comment I should make is that you may say, well, what about the independent scientists? We did set aside money for the kind of scientist who doesn't like to work in a group, sort of an Einstein type that wants to go sit in a closet but does brilliant work. They got funded as well. So there was a set aside for that. So think about this as the way that we can make the future work for us and for society. Thank you.
Sure. So I think we have, thank you, Rita, for that wonderful case study. We have time for a question or two, if there is one out there.
Good.
No,
questions.
we're all looking to the future.
Keep thinking. Keep thinking.
Okay. So that brings me to the opportunity to wrap up this day. It's been an amazing collection of talks and thoughts and perspectives. And I really want to thank Margaret for providing us the opportunity to do this. I think we probably all learned that she had more facets to her career than we had fully appreciated. There's the policy world, the educational world, the opportunities for women and DEI expansion, how she makes you feel. And that's perhaps the most important ingredient for the success. She's going to go on to her next chapter, and we've all had a few thoughts come forward about what to do for American science and technology going forward in the current situation, which I think were surprisingly uplifting. And lastly, so I want to thank the folks who helped organize this. The program committee was Lahini, Aluihari, Chris Charles, Dick Norris, who helped put all this together. And the people who really made it work were Kayla Jackson, who organized us all, and Donna Shabke, who fed us and provided the AV and all this wonderful facility. And I think for the last thing, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret for the last word. Oh, no. Did I do that?
Actually, Kayla had told me that my comments were going to be at the reception, so I thought, oh, lubricated. You know. No, it's okay. No, it's fine. Right. Okay. I want to join Kathy in thanking everybody. And first of all, the organizing committee, of course, Kayla, Donna, and all of the people who did all the work behind the scenes to make this happen. And all of you for coming and taking time, some of you traveling a long way to come and share these fantastic experiences with me and to see some of the science that has motivated me in the past, some of the other interests, scientific societies, science and policy, and so forth. Some special words to the students. You know, you start out with this sense, and I listened to all of you talk about how much you were excited about your future, some of that in terms of working with people and teaching and advocacy, and some of it research. And you know, you sit as a student and you sort of imagine a future for yourself. And I think that I didn't have a grand plan. There was no, I want to be an assistant director of NSF or a director of Scripps. But I think that the key for me was always being able to see what new possibilities there were and new ways to use what I had learned, and to think about the way that I could have opportunities to have other people have as much fun as I've had in science. And take advantage of those. You know, so one of the other things that Yogi Berra is famous for saying is, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. And that was really an essential part of seeing the fork as an opportunity to do something different, but still influencing this community. One of the things that I was delighted to see Chris talk about was the work that's been done by Research America and others on people's impression of science. And I think that, you know, it's easy for us to sit at a challenging time like this and say, they don't appreciate us, they don't understand us, they won't give us money, they'll, you know, all of this. And I think that every single survey that's been done in the last 50 years that I'm aware of has come to that same fundamental piece of information, that people appreciate science. They may not understand what our lives are like, you know, science as a habit of life, a habit of thinking, but they understand what the results are. And I think that's what gives the basic confidence. And that means that, you know, when we come to situations like this, I think that we're currently experiencing the accumulated lack of our concentration on telling people what our work does for them, as opposed to what it does for us. And that sense of looking beyond, you know, what does it mean for us to get a lot of money as an individual, as an institution, as a field of science? It doesn't matter unless we're doing something that affects people. Discovery is not the only game, the only sport in this game. And so I was also pleased to see so many of you talk about communication. Janelle, absolutely, but how many of the students talked about their commitment to communication? And it doesn't mean that we're all going to be as effective communicators as maybe our communications team is, but that that attempt that we make to tell people about the impact of what we do on their lives is really the thing that will get us out of this situation. I also, as I was thinking about various tough times, and you know, several of you mentioned different tough times in the past. One of the ones that really stood out for me as I was thinking about it was Sputnik. So I'm old enough that I was in grade school at the time of Sputnik. I remember the headlines in the newspapers. I remember the shock of a country that felt so confident coming out of World War II that we could invest in the Marshall Plan for Germany and for other European countries, to see another nation take the lead in that way. And then it was closely followed by our first attempt, which was failed. And I remember the headlines then. You know, there were words, instead of Sputnik, it was Flopnik and other kinds of derogatory terms. And what that did was it really raised the competitive spirit of the country. National Defense Education Act and the NDER fellowships really had a lot to do with blooming of science at that time. And I think that we're in a point now where, you know, we look around us, we look in admiration and envy at our colleagues from China, and the investment that the country makes. And we all, you know, science is an international sport. We all have Chinese colleagues that we know, appreciate. But there's that curve, not only that in terms of publications. I know this is something AGU has followed very closely with the rise in publications. And I think that it certainly raises our competitive spirit as scientists, but I think that we're at a time where some of what's happening to science and some of what's happening in other countries is really going to raise that competitive spirit in the country. I'm not sure exactly what is going to be a trigger like Sputnik was. You know, is it another, you know, is it the space race? Is it something that has AI? What a shock that was for people in this country. And there's a lot of conversation about, you know, whether the Chinese AI was fully comparable. That doesn't matter. What matters is it happened, and it caught the attention of everybody. And I think that we're at a stage where some of these things are going to result in a rise of that competitive spirit. And I think that is also a piece that we see in the future. A couple of other things that I wanted to mention. One of the things that I think about a lot is the group of people that made it possible for me to do the things that I've had the privilege of doing. And I especially want to thank the people here at Scripps for that. When I was at NSF, we still had the Federal Executive Institute. Fleming, Rick, Rita are all smiling. It's a month-long leadership program that everyone in senior executive service had to participate in. And it was all about leadership and, you know, what makes leaders. And one of the comments that, as people tried to define what leadership was, I'll never forget the person that said, a leader has followers. And look around, and if there's no one there, you're not a leader. But that means that those, it's not like you're standing up there and then there's sheep. the followers are really the people that are actually doing the hard work. They're the ones that are making it possible for you to be a leader. And when I think about Scripps, I certainly think about the faculty, I certainly think about the researchers and the students and the staff, but there are also, I particularly want to thank the leaders among them. So I was privileged to work with fantastic scientists who were deputy directors of research, associate deans for both academic affairs and faculty equity, chairs of the department, vice chairs of the department, section heads on the academic side. And they were the ones who responded as leaders themselves to say, we have an opportunity here. We want to envision ourselves as a different Scripps, so we will do it. I think that another piece is that's the academic side, and of course it's fantastic. But Scripps has also benefited. I told Kathy this morning, I don't know why I bothered to put on eye makeup today. From an extraordinary staff of people who are not academics who made all of this possible. Patrick Callahan and everybody from facilities, operations, and administration. Kathleen Ritzman, who isn't here, who is the head of our external relations. She's been in DC about every other week. She came back yesterday and she's not here because she sat next to somebody that was ill and didn't mask, and now she's ill. The fantastic group from communications and Lauren Wood. And so much of what Scripps is known for is known because of the incredible communications group that does such a fabulous job of translating that for the public. Some of the other groups involved are the DDR staff, and now Frank Trong, the DDR himself, Jack Gilbert, who is taking care of his wife who had surgery Friday, and he has just been a pleasure to work with. Some of the other folks that made all this happen are the development folks, and you heard from Raquel at lunchtime. David Hanses, our Director of Development, isn't here today because he's out with donors, and does such an amazing job of communicating what we do and communicating to the donors. You heard a lot about Nan Renner today and her outreach at Birch Aquarium. Harry Helling as well. The Birch Aquarium is part of Scripps. It was actually mandated in the documents that formed Scripps that we would always have an aquarium that was open to the public. And they have really taken the charge of being the portal of entry for Scripps, an outreach, communication aspect for us, and also one in which the science is highlighted as much as the organisms in the tanks and so forth. And they're very proud to have been listed. It's a relatively small aquarium, but it was listed twice this year as one of the 10 best aquaria in the country, precisely because of this organic link between the science and the aquarium. I have to think I can't leave anybody out. These are the people that, I can say, you know, I think, oh, Chiara, my God, of course. You heard from Chiara, who's our Executive Director of Diversity Initiatives. And I think that as all of us struggled, all of us in universities, all of us in oceanography struggled to try to address the problem that we were the least diverse field of any in science, even less diverse than engineering and physics. Yes, Fleming. She has been a special partner to try to help us reach out and provide opportunities for more people to share this special sort of experience and special opportunity. So, you know, it's one thing to get all of the accolades, and I appreciate all of you being so generous with them. But it always takes a village. It takes a staff. It takes the students. It takes the faculty. And they are the real heroes here.